because that's really what it is. We are walking slowly because there's so many different facets of whatever we need to be doing, not just in ministry, but also in personal life. And so we need to be patient. And so I think that's important to realize.
Buongiorno. You're listening to Going, Where God is at Work, a podcast that sits at the intersection of missions theory and practice. And we're walking out our call to ministry in faraway places, and happy to have you join us on the journey. I'm your host, Jesse Polly, a missions leader serving in Rome. And I'm here with Alessandro Di Leonardo, a church planter in Cisterna di Latina, and Jen Williamson, a missiologist who lives and works in Lyon. And it doesn't seem to, it always hits me that every time I do our intro, that it's going to have to change over time, without a doubt, because at some point, Alessandro's just going to be the pastor of a church in Cisterna Latina. It will no longer be the church plant. And also, I was thinking, we say we're doing missions in faraway places where really we're all relatively close to each other, geographically speaking. But we do recognize that our listeners and the people that are hopefully invested in kingdom work with us are in faraway places, right?
I thought you were getting prophetic, Jesse. I thought you were going to prophesy something about what's my next steps.
Yeah, there might be something there. Instead of, it will always be church planter, maybe the next place will be a faraway place. I don't know. Could be something to that.
Well, far away is a relative term too, right? We're close to each other, but we're far away from a lot of our listeners.
There we go. Relativism. That is the answer to our problem. No, just joking. So how about we kick it off this way with a question for Jen. What has been on your mind when it comes to discipleship? Yeah, what have you been wrestling with?
Yeah. I've been thinking about it a lot because the Missio Nexus Mission Leaders Conference registration has just opened. It will be in Orlando in September. The theme is discipleship. They're actually calling it deep. And as a team, as we've been preparing for this conference and talking about it, we've realized that it is actually one of the more difficult ones. And so generally, the big overarching themes that we're dealing with, I think, in missions in general, are evangelism, discipleship, and church planting. And evangelism is a little bit more clear cut. We kind of know the objective. Our hope is to make the gospel known and to see people come to faith in Christ. And it's measurable in the sense that I can measure either how many times I've shared the gospel or how many people my church has baptized or things like that. And then the same is true with church planting. We can count when a church has been planted. We can identify, we can say, okay, this is formed now. This is a church plant. And it's an objective that we can quantify. But discipleship is a forever thing. And we've talked about this before on the podcast. Discipleship, we think, begins, before people even come to faith. And discipleship continues after a church has been planted and within a church. And so it's this whole spectrum, whole life thing. And so I've been thinking a lot about what does that mean and what does it look like? And if missions organizations are prioritizing this and saying, this is what we care about, this is what we're investing in, it's a harder thing to say, how do we know when we've reached that objective? And I was talking with one of my mentors today about this, and as we talked, she's like, I really think that, the measure of discipleship is obedience, because the Great Commission is go and make disciples, teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you. And that's definitely true. Like in my life, I can see places where my obedience to Christ has grown, or where I've become more able to follow, or less prone to certain sins or whatever. It's a really hard thing to quantify across the board within a whole organization. And maybe it doesn't need to be quantified, but I've just been thinking a lot about what does that mean? And even from a personal investment standpoint. So I'll share a story there. I have a good friend here in Lyon. She's been my friend for 5 years. I met her 5 years ago at the co-working office space that our church used to have, and she was one of the coworkers. And early in our relationship, we spent some time studying the Bible together. I gave her a Bible. She was interested, but there was not any clear decision or movement that I could witness or see. But I really liked her and we're friends. So we kept having lunch and kept meeting and got together. Fast forward to like 2 weeks ago. And she leaves me this long voice message. She's been reading her Bible. She has come to she's accepted and following Jesus Christ. She's been coming to church. And in some senses, I think I was investing in that. In other senses, I feel like God gave me the privilege of observing his work in another person's life and just sort of being a spectator, a witness to what he was doing with another person. I am delighted. I'm thrilled. I'm excited for her next steps. And yet I wouldn't know, when I go in with my missions organization to fill out a metrics sheet, I wouldn't have a box to check. So these are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. And all of those lunches that we got together and hung out, again, I believe Christ wooed her to himself. I also know that he invites us to participate in that process in some way. And so I think even you going out with the other fathers, Jesse, and just being with them and being present to them, there's something happening there that God can work with and that I think God does work with. And I don't think we should discount those sorts of investments.
Yeah, I think it's so like, I don't know where it comes from. It's so instilled in us to want to look for like the countable, transactional kind of dynamics, but those relational dynamics are very different. And yeah, there, like, part of me wants to say there has to be a way to measure it, but oftentimes you can't measure it until it's all like way later, and you can kind of look back and see the build up, right?
Yeah, we have to wait for a while before this conference happens, but I'll be very interested to see what the outcome is or what they bring forward. Because obviously, like you said, Jesse, there's something that we all think about nonstop, not just necessarily in metrics, but is it working? Is people, there's this idea, absolutely, Jen, where God is the one to bring people to Christ. But if you're in a place and no one's coming to Christ or it's taking forever, you kind of have to say, hey, something not working. Are we not doing it right? Are we missing the mark? And so it's a constant back and forth. That's good. I'm glad that they're investing in a conference in regards to that. I think it's much needed. And like I said, I'm looking forward to the outcome and hearing from you what's some of the things that they bring forward. In my case, I just recently, like I mentioned, I came back from the States, and the reason I went was for they call it a stage, apprenticeship, shadowing a church, specifically a pastor, part of our network, part of our denomination, and I got a chance to go and see 2 Sundays and in between all their activities, and then even got a chance to stay with him and his family and got to ask so many questions and got to spend time with his other co-pastors. And my biggest takeaway is that I'm so glad that this happened now. When I was in seminary, they require you to do, most seminaries do, in some form or another, to do ministry hours. And so you have to get your hands wet, you have to, your hands dirty, you have to go in. But at the same time, you're not really thinking about, you're just kind of trying to fulfill your duties, the duties that they asking you to fulfill. And so when I went this time, it was more me realizing how can I contextualize this back home, and I was asking better questions than questions that maybe were just trying to see how I can get that A, how I could fulfill my ministry hours. So it was such a sweet time. I recommend everyone to kind of never stop growing. So in this case, what I'm saying is I was being discipled. Like, even though I'm the pastor, I'm the church planter, it was a great opportunity to be discipled, to go and to be able to receive and to ask all those questions like I was when I was in school. So I was very happy, but in a place that I think I had better questions today than I would have had before.
No, it's so That's so good. You said the apprenticeship word there, and that's just been something that's been, I'm hearing that in more and more places right now. And I didn't have that, I didn't think of that word, or I didn't put that, to this. But years ago during the pandemic, I helped with a seminar on multi-generational leadership and what does it look like, to to do that well in missions and ministry. And one of the things that we came to as we were preparing was this idea that like we're in a generation that has access to a lot of information. And so no one really is needing other people to give them information because they can open up their computers or their smartphones and get access to information. But what they're not having is the ability to work on what does it look like to put that into action. How do you solve real life problems with that information that you have, this kind of stuff. And so we were encouraging our audience that we were presenting for, that's the unique role that leaders, more experienced, mature leaders have with young emerging leaders, is to bring them alongside and help them see how you put into action things and how do you and so this idea of apprenticeship just keeps coming up because that's basically what it is, right? You walk with the person, you see how they're doing it, and you get to ask questions while you're doing it. And you've been pastoring for years, you understand the basics of pastoring and all that stuff, but to go and be on the ground with somebody gives you just a whole other experience. And the conference that I was just recently a part of, which it was an event, but the idea is for this event to become more than an event, but an actual community of people. And I was so intrigued because it was organized like no other conference or event that I've ever been to before. And one of the things that they offered is a 1-week apprenticeship program. So the whole conversation was around discipleship. And then they, towards the end, they said, hey, if you feel like you need help in this, or somebody who you think needs help in this, they've already pre-vetted and found a handful of places where you could sign up and organize to go for 1 week and apprentice under another disciple maker. And that doesn't mean that they're in full-time ministry. It doesn't mean they're a pastor or missionary. It just means that they are actively in their life seeking to be a disciple maker. And so it's just interesting hearing, what you just did. And then this conference, that part of that was one of the things that they offered people was, hey, you can sign up and go to this thing. And it's not like a money grab. It's not a way to earn money, or it's just their way of connecting the dots between people that want to grow in this. I think it's the answer to some of the things that we've even talked about before, like with Mission Nexus and not Mission Nexus, sorry, the Lausanne movement, and some of the things that they found around the need for tech, thinking the digital world and all this kind of stuff. Like one of the things I think about is how do we disciple and bring people to walk alongside us and see and operate with us. So I mentioned it, but I was at this thing called the All launch event, and this was the first event. They did a trial event last year, but the idea is our organization, in partnership with a bunch of others, are trying to encourage everyday believers to be about making everyday disciples in their everyday life. So it's just really trying to equip and inspire Europeans in particular, because that's where we're at, but really anyone in the world, to see themselves as part of the players on the field, and not to just kind of delegate that to the pastors and missionaries or deacons or elders, but to actually see themselves in that. And so it was really cool. There was tons of different speakers from all over the world. I think there was no Americans actually, which was kind of refreshing to me. I'm always encouraged when I get to hear from different voices and perspectives. And they just did short TED Talks. So it's just like, 10, 15-minute talk. And then usually there's a panel discussion or video of some sort, and then another 10 or 15-minute talk. And then the afternoon was all kind of workshops. You got to go and be with people. And so it's really cool. You got to interact with a lot of different people. And then another interesting element is they started this WhatsApp community, And from there, if you were in a workshop, you could sign up to be a part of a ongoing cohort. So the cohorts are going to go for like 6 months. So they have an end date. It's not like this perpetual, you never know when you can awkwardly exit the group or whatever. So it's like 6 to 8 months, and it's just a way to encourage, those that were part of the workshop to keep in communication, to, bring stories or testimonies and wrestle with the concepts after the event was over. And so yeah, it's just a really encouraging time to see how we can go about making disciples and encouraging everybody to be about making disciples.
Were you able to take people with you, Jesse?
Yes. Yeah. That was another highlight for me. So the way that it was organized is you had the fee for the conference was like 75 euros. But you had to figure out your own lodging, your own food, all of that. So you just, and so consequently, it encouraged people to think of like Airbnbs and hostels and different stuff. And so we got an Airbnb, and we had 8 people, and we brought 4 Italians, 4 missionaries. And yeah, it was really, really fun time. I could see
Cool.
my Italian colleagues were just super encouraged by the format of the event, and then some of the conversations we got to have. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I think it's great to have an event like that where even the going to the event can be part of the discipleship process. Like you're taking people with you to encourage them to go farther. And that's, I think, amazing. And I also have been thinking about, connected with all of this, like where discipleship happens. So I think so often, at least in my upbringing and the Western mindset, was, people come to church and they listen to a sermon, and then they've heard the word of God, and then they'll go out and they'll do the word of God. Or maybe a weekly Bible study, and you'd get some input there. And those were formative things in my life, and I think they're valuable and important. When you look at all, like you were saying, the digital content out there, people are being discipled by YouTube and by podcasts and by all of these other things. And as church workers, you get 20 minutes in a sermon a weekend. And, the amount of time you have in a structured event is the really minimal part of the input that people have into their lives these days. And so I think, I really want to encourage people, friends, family, people I'm discipling, to be aware of what's discipling them. Because the word disciple really just means learner or apprentice. And we apprentice ourselves to different things. And so that means thinking about, what is the content? What is the input? Where am I going to for wisdom? Is it ChatGPT? Is it the Word of God? Is it advisors, counselors, people around me, elders, pastors? And I think it's good for us all to be aware that, like Alessandra said, we're discipled our whole life. I disciple people. I am also being discipled. But what am I being discipled by? And I think that's a good thing for us to be wrestling with.
Yeah, I think in all of our conversations, we kind of stayed away from trying to be specific on like certain resources, certain like booklets, certain things, because obviously every context is different. Not everyone likes every material, but the thing you can't take away is the personal relationship. Obviously, first with God, but then with community, with certain people who invest, and so. I think what's important is to realize that it's an investment. I kind of playing back with what you were saying, Jesse, about investing in these fathers in case God opens up a door. And so it's kind of realizing that the whole discipleship process, if you're going to disciple, is an investment, but also if you want to be disciple, it's an investment. You got to go and look for resources, but resources behind these resources, there's people behind them that they can disciple you. And so it's very important that the word invest. My apprenticeships is something that you put in time. You, especially, here in Italy, you actually still see the idea of apprenticeship, the actual artisan. I have my son, or I have this young man, this young lady who's walking with me, so then they can take over the business. We actually see it here, and to realize that's really what it is. We are walking slowly because there's so many different facets of whatever we need to be doing, not just in ministry, but also in personal life. And so we need to be patient. And so I think that's important to realize. And then another one is you don't need to be an expert to disciple. You are imparting what you know. You know this, you impart that. And so sometimes I think there's this daunting idea that I don't disciple because it's I'm not like my pastor, I'm not like that missionary, I'm not trained. And sure, don't be discipling, don't be saying things you don't know, but I'm sure you know a lot. The Lord has made you skilled in the areas that you're skilled in now, and sometimes it has nothing to do with necessarily how to read the Bible. It could be, well, I tend to cook this way because my desires to then love on people and cook for people, and I do that because I'm a follower of Jesus. Oh, I'd never thought about that. You know, it's literally silly conversations like that that actually makes a large part of how people are being discipled.
Yeah, that was one of the encouraging things about the All initiative was that, well, first of all, the average age I think was under 40 for the all like 300 people or whatever that were there. And then so many people that I would talk to, they had only been a believer for like a year or so. And so to hear that many people that were just young, new in their faith, but they were coming to something that was trying to encourage them to be about sharing and discipling others was so encouraging. And there was one guy, he was an older, not that much old, not that old, but anyways, he was not so young, and he but mature in his faith. But he shared vulnerably just an example where he actually pulled up on the screen his chat messages, and showed how he's a soccer coach, and he showed how his interaction with the parents of the kids that he coaches, how he sprinkles his faith into those messages in such a way that it gives an opportunity for them to ask him questions, or for him to be able to, it also holds him accountable in a way because he's, is very open about his faith. And one of the messages he shared, he said, I'm a Christian and I believe that everyone's a sinner. And so I'm also a sinner. And so I'm sorry if, because I realized I shouldn't have maybe done that, or my passion was getting ahead of me. And he just vulnerably apologized to, but he didn't hold back the part that he's a Christian and he believes that as being a sinner, he might make mistakes. He said, I could have left that out. I could have just apologized for my passion getting ahead of me, but intentionally living out our faith. And so it's just cool to see, little things like that, and just show that, you don't have to have a PhD in anything really to tell people what you know so far about who Jesus is.
Yeah. And what you've experienced of him. And I think that is helpful and motivational for people. And yeah, I really appreciate how you brought that in, because I think how often I have conversations about sort of guidelines I have for shopping, like that have ethical roots to them. And those ethics are rooted in my belief in, the dignity of humans and the Imago Dei, and not wanting to support slavery, or, things like that. And how we can sometimes, I think I have these well-established habits, all to the glory of God and by his grace, because I've been a believer for a long time, that I don't even realize now how rooted it is in that, in my essential beliefs. And so that's helpful, Jesse, what you just shared, to think about, being able to be explicit about my why, even about the things that are so deeply ingrained.
Yeah, I think it's just, discipleship is just one of those things that I don't know how to put my finger on it, but I feel like sometimes we wish it was just like a curriculum thing. Like, okay, you did the 10 course, 10 lesson discipleship course, and now you're done. Like, and I don't know why that is, but I feel it, even myself wanting that. But then there's just something also that's really beautiful about the idea, and humbling about the idea that we're always going to be needing someone who's farther along to show us the way, you know?
Mm. I try to make sure in my life that I always have at least one up, one down, one over. So one person who's a few steps ahead of me that I'm looking to, that I'm like, oh, how can I grow in this area and this person can disciple me? One person I think, how can I invest in this person and encourage them in their faith to come along? And then also, who am I with on this? Like, who are my peers right now that we're just in this together and we can relate to each other at this phase of life or in this stage of work? And when one of those isn't present in my life, I get out of balance in a certain way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was taught exactly what you said, Jen, at the beginning when I just became a Christian. I was taught you need a Paul, you need a Timothy, and you need a Barnabas. And so, and what's interesting, what I found out is that I actually, it's so funny because it ended up happening that sometimes your Paul can become your Timothy, because there's just seasons where you kind of become an expert in a certain area, walk of life, and that person wants to learn from you, and then that person could be your Barnabas, where they're walking alongside with you, or sometimes they just happen to be more experienced in an area, so you're learning from them. And I think that's the beautiful thing about when you're being discipled. It's not a class. You're actually making long time friends, and an opportunity to really have people, the people that Jesus talks about, walk alongside with you, and it helps you grow. And so whether you're the one teaching, whether you're absorbing, learning, or walking alongside, it's always a learning process.
And what a great opportunity to stay teachable ourselves. I mean, that's a great example when you said sometimes your Paul becomes your Timothy. Think of like the Apostle Paul came to faith after Peter. Peter was, the more mature, knew Jesus longer, the whole thing. But then there's a point where Paul has to rebuke Peter and say, look, you can't separate yourself from these people. And I think that was probably really hard for both of them, and really humbling for both of them to be in that space. But I think as we mature as disciples, that actually becomes more and more the reality. There's places where I'm going to need, someone else to kind of help me along who maybe I've helped along previously. And we become sort of these sisters and brothers in Christ that are journeying together.
Yeah, it's definitely it's definitely an interesting dynamic when the student surpasses the teacher kind of moment. We had that kind of recently because someone who I would have referred to as a mentor more than anything recently joined our team on the ground, and so now it's kind of like I'm in a way their supervisor or their leader, but I still look up to them. But then they're looking up to me for how do you navigate living in this country and moving internationally, and so yeah, it's an interesting dance, and but I think when it's wrapped in trust, it works so well because it's like we each recognize that we need each other to get through it, and that was the other interesting component. If I can say one other thing about this event that I went to. I don't know about you guys, but I've been to lots of different conferences, different places, and a lot of times you go home with like your lanyard and your like name tag or whatever. And this event, and I don't know, it's probably happened in other events too, but this one, they asked you to exchange your little like name card thing in it with another person. And so you took theirs home, and so that gave you an incentive to pray for that person. And I just thought that was really cool because instead of walking away from it thinking all about, me and what did I learn and what did I get from this time, I now think a little bit more about young Lee and praying for young Lee and his experience so this morning I just thought of him and started praying for him. And so I thought that was another way when we start realizing, we talk about this a lot on this podcast, that we're doing missions with. And it's not just that we're doing missions with those that we're physically with or closely with or with God, but we're actually doing missions with people that are doing it all throughout the world. And so when we start seeing ourselves as part of that bigger church, the capital C, that is so much more encouraging, because in an ever globalizing world, you might disciple someone for a season, and then the next season they get up and move to the other part of the world, and someone there is going to pick up the mantle and start discipling them right where they're at, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I was gonna say that to kind of include in the overall package of what we're talking about, discipleship, not necessarily to implement formats or have a curriculum, but I think just to kind of point out why a lot of times discipleship might not work well. It's two parts. One is we don't ask people if they want to be disciple. It might even sound awkward. It might be like, what do you mean? Or you think you're better than me? When now it's easier for me because I have a pastoral title. But when I wasn't a pastor, I just felt I was blessed that when I got saved, I was in college and they had a discipleship program in the campus ministry. And so then when I was going to church, I was like, wow, here's a lot of people who are not being discipled. I would love to disciple them. And so and it wasn't a culture. It didn't exist in our church. It wasn't a thing. And so I just went, and at the beginning it was a little weird and a lot of learning on my part when they say, what do you mean by discipleship? Oh yeah, I don't know what I mean. So I had to come up with definitions and what I understood it to mean. That's one. So we have to definitely go looking to disciple people. And then the second would be when we are being discipled, as I do like the fact that people who are wiser, or at least in better in a certain area of that season, of that thing that I want to learn, that they kind of say, here, let me upload everything I know onto you. But that doesn't work. So you have to actually know what you want from this person. You should, like, hey, I want to grow. Where? Like, be specific, figure out, spend some time, figure out what are the things that you want to know. And then when you find it on someone, ask those questions. In fact, when I went to this apprenticeship opportunity that I got to go and shadow a pastor, I made sure that, okay, what do I want to ask? I don't want to just be like observing. Sure, some questions came out of nowhere because I was experiencing things, but for the most part, I was like, these are the things I want to look for and ask him about. And it was super helpful. And so I think definitely let's go look for disciples, asking them, figure out what it means to you, and then also learn to ask good questions so that you can learn.
I also love, Alessandro, how you said that the church you were at didn't necessarily have a discipling culture, because I do think that's a part of it. If it's just normal for everyone in the church, from the pastor to the children to the newest person who's walked through the door, if there's language around that, if whatever the words you use are, if there's tools, great. They're very helpful, but doesn't have to be a certain one. Some methodology, maybe even a little training and structure around some definitions, like you said, that gives it language. All of that, it can be slow to build, but I do think it helps. If the culture of the church is one of discipleship, then it becomes sort of normalized in how we go about walking out the Christian faith. And so I think that's probably another thing that's on our hearts as we think of ourselves as church leaders or mission leaders, not just my own personal discipleship and who am I discipling and who is discipling me, but how am I helping to create cultures of discipleship in the places where I'm doing ministry.
Yeah. One of the things, we haven't used this word, I don't think yet, but I think one of the things is that's so key is that it needs to be incarnational. Like, it needs to be with a person or people, a small group of people. There's just a different dynamic to that. And I think sometimes when our churches talk about discipleship or have cultures of discipleship, it's based around classroom, based around content, but it's not as heavily focused on the people component. And it was so cool that I hope they release some of the messages from the conference, because I think it would be helpful to share even with our audience. But one of the main texts that was spoken from was Luke 24, the road to Emmaus, and Jesus walking with the disciples there. And a couple of things that were pointed out by the speaker was that he just appears next to them. So he's not way in front of them saying, hey, come, catch up with me. Or he's not way behind them saying, okay, now I'm going to go get those two people up there. That's the two I'm going to go. No, he just appears next to them where he's at, where they're at, and they just start walking. And Jesus just starts asking questions. And there's just this curiosity that goes back and forth. He's like, what is the matter with you guys? What's going on? And they're like, what? You haven't heard about what just happened? Like, where have you been? And there's just this dialogue of just curiosity, questions on both sides. The one that, in one way it's discipling, and the other one. And then there is a moment of teaching. He breaks in probably the best Bible study that was never recorded. He opens the scriptures and explains himself through the whole Old Testament. And then they go and eat together. And even there's like this irony, because Jesus like pretends like he's going to keep walking, and they're like, no, come and have dinner, And so there's just this incarnational component of, coming alongside people, walking with people, talking with people, eating with people. I think those are the key things. And then all, like you were saying, Jen, all the other stuff, all the curriculums, all the language, that's all good supplemental things. But we need to first start just having people right next to us and sharing meals, sharing things with them. They were obviously going through a hard time in that passage. They're sad. They're going back home. So even walking with people in their sadness and all of that. So yeah, I think if there's anything that it would be great for us to give some takeaways for people to take away. And I think for me, if there's anything that anyone took away from this podcast and this talk on discipleship, would be that it needs to be incarnational. It needs to be two per two, as we would say, one-on-one, physically next to and with the person.
Life on life is so valuable as much as we can do it. Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. And it does happen in the doing of life, in the eating of meals, and the walking the dog, and the washing the dishes, and all of the stuff, the picking the kids up from school, there's opportunities all around us, and it's helpful to be intentional and to set up some times that are distinct and set apart and dedicated to this kind of growth and investment, as another word that we've been using. I think that would be my takeaway. If you're going to take incarnational, I'm going to take investment, and Alessandra, you're going to have to come up with an I. So I hope you're thinking about it right now. But I would say investment, because it costs us something. It does cost us time, and even being a disciple of Christ, I have to. It costs me something to obey. There's a whole pick up your cross and follow me thing. There's a whole like dying to yourself thing. There are these things as we follow Christ. And I say investment because investments, you get back more than you put in if it's a good investment. And with following Jesus, you always get back more than you could ever give or that you could put in. But putting in the time to be incarnational with others, putting in the time to be close to Jesus yourself and to be growing in depth, putting in your time to sit under other people's wisdom and teaching and learning. I think we have to invest in discipleship.
I'm a trained Baptist pastor. That's how we preach, with the same letters, 3 points. But I am suffering from jet lag right now. So I would say, if anything, it would have to be interactive. I think that's what it needs to be. It can't just be like a transfer of information. I think we see that when you put into practice what you're learning, it's unbelievable. And obviously that's how Jesus did discipleship, just how Jesus, he showed them how to do it. Then they did it with him, and then eventually he sent them off to do it on their own. I still remember I was at a youth retreat, and I was one of the counselors, and there was this young man that was a counselor as well, but he was talking to me, and he was like, I've been coming to this retreat for many years as a youth, and I never really got anything out of it. And now as a counselor, I'm like, I can't believe how amazing it's going. And I was like, yeah, sometimes when we are the ones doing, we actually are more blessed than the ones receiving. And I told him that, and he was like, oh wow, I didn't know that. And I know when I teach, most of the things that I remember from the Bible is because I preached on it. I'm always curious when I didn't touch upon a topic. I'm like, yes, because I didn't preach on that. That's why I don't remember. I know I read it, but I didn't. I don't remember. So, yeah, definitely interactive.
Wow, that is good. I wish we had like sound bar here. We would play like the clapping when you said interact. I was just like, you pulled that out. I thought you were gonna come up with something and not an I, and you pulled it out. He's clutch, guys. Alessandro is clutch. Came in with the interactive. What a good word. So there you have it. We've had a little bit of something for everyone in our podcast, and today it was for the Baptist. We got 3 points with 3 I's, so that's for you guys. Hey, we really appreciate you all. We're so grateful that you took time to tune into this episode, and we hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it insightful. Your ministry is important to us, and we hope that you consider your time with us an investment in your work. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this podcast with your friends. And until next time, keep going wherever Jesus leads you.